Hello, my name is Timothy Reed. Together with my colleague Elena Barthena from UNED Spain, we're going to talk to you this afternoon about the application of language MOOCs for social inclusion. I'd like to start off by thanking Ali Reza Khalilifar for the invitation to participate in this conference and to apologize for not actually being able to be there personally. But I hope that won't be a problem. I hope you'll still get something from this presentation. This presentation, we're going to give it in two parts. I'll give the first part talking about the context of MOOCs and why they're appropriate for helping refugees and migrants with their language learning, and then Elena will come along and do the second half and focus more on the linguistics and how we can actually support refugees and migrants in their language learning activities. LMOOCs, possibilities in general. Now, MOOCs, massive open online courses in general, are very useful for helping students get an introductory understanding of different ideas, areas of knowledge. And they're particularly useful for languages when they're called LMOOCs or language MOOCs, because language in this context is not just the content that's being studied, like physics, for example. It's also the vehicle, in the sense that the students can use the second language when they're communicating with their peers and with their teachers and facilitators in the online course, and this can help them actually practice it. Obviously, if we're talking about students who are just beginning to use a second language, then they're going to find it a bit difficult to begin with, but with help and support they can begin to do it and can make progress. So we also need to be aware of the fact that as well as language MOOCs, we also have what we can call CLIL MOOCs, which is Content and Language Integrated Learning MOOCs. These MOOCs require a slightly higher level of language ability before a student can start to learn. So we might be talking about a high A2 or a low B1 if we use the common European framework of reference. But the advantage with CLIL MOOCs are that students can actually practice their language at the same time as they are learning about a particular area of knowledge. So we can imagine, for example, that the students can start off with language MOOCs, and as they progress, move across to CLIL MOOCs or other kinds of courses. Now, when we started to look about the possibilities of using language MOOCs for refugees back in February of 2017, we found there were in fact 85 courses online and freely available, as you can see in the table there. The majority for English, but there are also quite a few for Spanish and Chinese. So the question here is, are standard LMOOCs appropriate for refugees? So the question here is, are standard LMOOCs appropriate for refugees? In order to be able to answer this question, we need to look at some of the contextual factors that underlie the group which we refer to as refugees, migrants or displaced people. To begin with, the life circumstances in which they live are typically quite fluid, specific and complex. They've quite often been forced to move away from their homes and are travelling to reach a new destination, hopefully a more stable and secure destination. So the problem here, obviously, is that being on the move, not having access to a stable home and environment, does tend to make learning somewhat difficult. It also tends to imply that their main computing device for online learning will be mobile devices, typically smartphones or some tablets, and their network access will be somewhat limited. I hope you'll forgive me for having a small play on words here in the slide when I refer to refugee as being a verb and not a noun. Obviously, I'm not making this statement as a linguist. What I'm trying to highlight here is the psychological state of a displaced person, in the sense that they see themselves as being in a transitory state. They're not going to be refugees forever. So therefore, we need to harness this change in their circumstances to help them learn as they go along. The Times Higher Educational Supplement some time ago released a very interesting article which you can find in the link put on the slide here, which actually shows that typically refugees aren't keen on studying online. I think in a way this reflects their life circumstances, the fact they already feel quite isolated, and really what they want are face-to-face classes to feel in an integrative, supportive environment and not working online, but also in some way because online courses are not valued as much as face-to-face ones. So this is something we need to bear in mind when we build our courses, and we actually provide the support for them to actually make their learning possible. The final point about recognition and certification is also quite important, because we need not only to help them learn, but we need to give them something to actually demonstrate that they've undertaken some kind of learning. And in the two introductory Spanish language MOOCs we'll be talking about today, we managed to get our university to certify these courses as being worth one ECTS, or European Credit Transfer System, 1 credit, and that's something they can have for free by finishing the course, and things that will help them towards future courses and further studying in the future. A key point here is that their language MOOCs need to be developed, to be designed and developed to deploy and run well on mobile devices. This is important because it's the only device they have, and it implies that when we prepare the content, the videos, the text, the activities, they need to work in a reasonable way in a mobile environment. Now, obviously the screen is small, using the keyboard is awkward, so we can't expect them to participate in any large writing activities, for example, but they can actually use the devices for this purpose. We've done studies, we've seen the results of other people's studies, and you can get good results from them. The only thing is there has to be specific care taken when you design the course and scaffolding it so that it actually it works well. I'd like at the moment to talk about the sorts of characteristics in general you can expect to find in a MOOC that's been designed for refugees and migrants, and how you might like to tutor that course or facilitate it, as it's sometimes called, to keep the students active in this learning process. Because what we need to bear in mind is that online learning of this type is an example of social learning, and if, as has been our objective in this course, we are training the 4 second language competencies of comprehension, production in the oral and written way, then we've got 4 different areas which we need to train in a constant and specific way. So it's very important that we actually get the students to engage in activities related to all of these 4 areas. So this particular guide that was written by 2 colleagues of ours at UNED, you can find it on Google if you search for a practical guide for MOOC tutoring and design, and it's PDF and you can download it for free. I'm just going to highlight some of the key issues here which I think are important when we think about the course. Firstly, the structure and the tools. You can really think about this in 3 areas. Firstly, the content that the students are going to use. Now, as a small aside, we can differentiate between XMOOCs and CMOOCs. XMOOCs are online courses which reflect the structure of standard face-to-face courses, and CMOOC, which are slightly less structured and more community driven. But in this case, these courses are more XMOOCs. So firstly, the content creation. When we come to prepare the videos and the textual resources, it's very important that the language used is appropriate for the level of the students who are taking part, which means that scripts have to be prepared for the dialogues with supporting materials that can be used to follow them. And in the case of videos, the basic rule we have followed is that for beginners, they can be subtitled in the target language. So for example, if we have people, as is our case, speaking in Spanish, we can subtitle the videos in Spanish to help the students. But since they are A1 and A2 students, then we actually provide transcriptions of the videos in English, French and Arabic, because that reflects the profile of the students who are actually taking the courses. Also, the videos and the texts need to be reasonably small so they can be downloaded onto the mobile devices. Assessment. Most assessment on MOOCs is self-assessment. We're using tests, but obviously if we want to get the students to engage and practice their productive skills, then we need to use peer-to-peer activities. Why? Because typically on these courses like the one we have at the moment, we have somewhere in the region of nearly 2,000 students, and there's probably about half a dozen staff and facilitators who are actually engaging with those students. So it's not realistic for the staff, the teachers on the course, to correct the materials. The students have to correct each other's materials. Now, I can hear you say, hang on, how can a beginner correct the target language production of another beginner? And this might sound far-fetched, but it's actually not. We can use correction rubrics, which actually has a double function. Firstly, they help the student correct the text that's actually being written. Very careful instructions about the way the text should be structured, the kinds of linguistic structures we expect to find there, vocabulary, etc. So it helps the person that we are correcting, but on the other hand, it also helps the person who's doing the correction, because it exposes us implicitly to the rules we need to learn, we need to be able to use when speaking in the target language. So it's a double advantage there. Regarding communication tools, the most commonly used one, as you'll see later, are the forums, the chats within the platform. And we encourage the students to speak in the target language, Spanish in our case, in there. And there are more or less structured activities in the forums, so the students can communicate, ask questions and undertake activities. For example, introducing themselves, saying hello, describing themselves. We also use social networks because when we first got in contact with our not-for-profit organisations, our refugee support groups, the very first thing we did was to give them questionnaires to tell us about the types of students they were working with. And it was quite clear from that that the social networks were tools which were very well used by the students. In our case, Facebook. So as you'll see later, we have a page on Facebook. But at the same time, you can arrange more complicated asynchronous and synchronous communications mechanisms online. So factors to take into account here. As I said before, the courses need to be designed primarily for mobile deployment. This can be easy. It depends on the specific MOOC platform we're using, but even with a very responsive MOOC platform, in the sense that it deploys well onto mobile devices, it's important for the content and the activities to be checked to make sure they also deploy well. We also need to think about audio descriptions and learning styles, because a lot of the students who are studying with us as refugees, who come from the MENA area, which is the Middle East, north of Africa, are more used to an oral learning style. So therefore it's important that we structure the content and the activities in this way. If we give them lots and lots of text to learn and assimilate, then there's not much chance they're going to finish the course. As I said before, it's important to use subtitles and transcriptions. We also need to recognize the fact that a MOOC, like other courses, doesn't have a sequence. It might have a sequence in the design, in the sense that there's the first module, the second, or the third, etc. But all modules are opened at the same time, which means that the students can jump around the modules depending on our interests. So we need to be aware of the fact there might be multiple learning paths through this material. And finally, consistent navigation is an important factor. So if we try and identify the criteria which we use to scaffold to support our refugees, then we can highlight 6 different criteria. These have come from the experience of our refugee support group, and even though they are different for one social group to the other, if we are trying to produce social inclusion and we are trying to bring people together in different kinds of social learning, then it is important that each of these factors are reflected in all MOOCs, not just the ones for refugees and migrants, and also not just the ones oriented towards language learning. First of all, usability and accessibility. The courses need to have a guide and have technical support. They need to be easy to use and have fairly attractive navigation, and wherever possible facilitate the download of the materials, the video, audios where possible, and also text. Connectivity, as I mentioned before, since the refugees and migrants are typically on the move, it's not always possible for them to have a decent connection to a high bandwidth network. So we need to make sure that certain activities, the individual learning, reflection, activities that are typically connected to the metacognitive aspects of learning, can be done when they're not necessarily connected to a network. Linguistic. I've marked this in red because in a minute I'm going to hand over to Elena, who's going to go into some detail of the linguistic mechanisms included in the course to facilitate language learning. But for now, I'd just like to highlight some features, some of which I've mentioned before, like, for example, the simplicity of expression and the predominance of the basic level of language, or at least the level to which a specific social group are assumed to belong. We also need to try and make the linguistic structure accessible for people who are not familiar with the Latin alphabet, to include a basic glossary and to have the speech that's used in the videos and audios that's produced at a pretty constant speed. It's interesting here that, for example, in English, some British people are reasonably guilty of speaking quickly and quietly and not vocalizing, which makes it very difficult for people to understand us. I've been living outside of the UK for more than 20 years now, and I've been told this on numerous occasions. The good news for Spanish learners is that Spanish is a language which is spoken very loudly and very clearly with good articulation, so it's a lot easier for people to learn. As I mentioned before, it's important the evaluation and accreditation, and we try to incorporate this into the course in different ways. And finally, it's important to include the cultural, intracultural and ethical aspects of the group of students who are going to take part in MOOCs. There's an interesting anecdote that, for example, on the big American MOOC platforms like Coursera, for example, or edX, there are actually lots of courses available which could be used by refugees and migrants. In fact, they do have some courses specifically prepared for this social group. However, they're not very popular. Why are they not very popular? Well, for many reasons. I wouldn't want to get into any great detail here, but perhaps mention that since the actors on the videos are white middle-class Americans, then also reflecting their typical life situations, then are not terribly relevant to people from MENA who are watching them, and they can in fact cause alienation. That's why in our courses we've taken particular care and have been very lucky to be able to work with actual refugees who are studying with our support groups, and they've come into our TV studios and have very kindly agreed to be recorded. Okay, so I'm going to finish on this next slide, which is a brief presentation of our open MOOC platform, Open edX. And you can see the general structure here with the horizontal menu at the top with resources and a vertical menu on the left hand side with the different sections. And without more ado, I'm going to pass over to my colleague Elena Barcenar, who is going to talk about the different linguistic aspects in this course. So thank you very much.
I am going to tell you now about 2 Spanish language MOOCs that we set up some time ago at UNED for displaced people, specifically for refugees and migrants. We took into consideration their complex and fluid circumstances, for sometimes they are here, there, they change places, they are in a very vulnerable situation that we wanted to consider, because although when the platform was set up at UNED, the hope was that it would be used by people that were in need for education and could not get that education by any other means. The fact was that it wasn't really reaching those groups. So we concluded that the problem with the courses we have, and it's about 200 courses, is that their philosophy of learning, the digital complexity, and their level of accessibility wasn't sufficient. So we decided to take into consideration the context of these people and the digital skills that could be reasonably expected from them. This is how, a few months ago, at UNED, we decided to launch 2 Spanish language MOOCs for displaced people. Of course, being a refugee is a verb and not a noun. It's a temporary circumstance, but their circumstances are complex, they are very specific, and they have to be taken into consideration. We are talking about people coming from different learning cultures, different digital cultures, and different language cultures as well. So that had to be researched, and we had to take into the consideration also their digital reality, the skills that were reasonably expected from them, and whether they would be mobile, they would be on the road at camps, and what kind of bandwidth, access to internet could they have there, and if it was reasonable to expect that everything, the whole course would have to be done online or not. So This is how we started designing 2 courses called Open Doors Spanish Courses for Immediate Needs. And this was a very interesting journey that we took with a group of NGOs, of non-governmental organizations from Spain dealing with refugees, and we invited them along. We wanted to know them. We wanted to know their reality because we weren't experts at all in this profile of a learner. And we asked them, who are you? What are your expectations? What are your training needs? What are your employability circumstances, etc., etc. And we interviewed them at length, and then we studied their results. And after that, realizing that their profile as a group was rather heterogeneous, we could, however, conclude that for these initial courses we were going to aim at a subgroup that would be reasonable for us to attempt to work with, because they weren't it wasn't too complex a scenario. I'm talking about people that were already literate in their own language, that they could even read or write or recognize our alphabet, Latin alphabet, etc. And we asked them, what are your immediate needs? And they unanimously said that it was basic Spanish. And I'm talking about A1, perhaps some A2. We also asked them about the content, and that is why we decided to do 2 courses, because we realized that it is a lot more efficient to have short courses. I'm talking about 5-6 week courses, because that way you can keep motivation up and expect a reasonable amount of daily work or weekly work perhaps. And we had enough contents for 2 courses. That's why we agreed that was the best option. It was exciting because the designers were the protagonists themselves, the refugees, and the teachers at the research at the refugee support centers, and us. We acted as coordinators, and we designed the courses together. They chose the topics they wanted to work on for the course, and we just went along with them, accompanying them really, and just like providing expertise on MOOCs and coordinating their action. We reflected on this fact that I was saying before, that MOOCs had not lived up to the expectations that we all initially had on them, thinking that they were going to be able to work as bridges between people completely outside formal education and formal education. That wasn't being the case since since MOOCs were launched in the year 2012, and we concluded that there was a series of criteria, of elements that could render true inclusion onto a online course like a MOOC. So we were committed to the fact that the courses would be refugee friendly, in the sense that they would attend their reality and their needs at a digital, learning, linguistic, cultural, even psychological level. That is why, for example, the language that we use throughout the course uses the first person plural, we, all along the course, instead of you or I, just like to provide these this idea, this atmosphere of inclusion and togetherness. So so far so good, and I'm pleased to say that we have almost 2,000 students registered in this first course with very good attitude, and it's working rather well. The contents that were decided for both courses were administration and bureaucracy, like how to get the documents that will allow you to stay in the country, all the basic paperwork that a refugee needs to start dealing with when they arrive in a host community. Routines and daily life, just basic daily life, like how to move around and go into a shop or whatever, travel and moving around, that's part of it, and going to the doctor, and everything related to health issues when one is not unwell, or a child, and how to go about to get professional assistance, medicines, etc. Then we decided to leave for the second course topics like socialization and integration, making friends, looking for housing, accommodation, and of course training and employment, and finally defending one's own rights. Scaffolding had to be provided at several levels. Technological, because not everybody obviously has the same level of digital skills. Pedagogic, because not everybody is used to learning online, and also learning is massive courses, so there was quite a bit of confusion could be expected at the beginning, and also cultural differences that we are aware of, and that had to be taken into consideration from the beginning, like the necessity to leave a space to people to tell about themselves and about their how things work in their countries as a point of comparison to the host community, because we believe that those links are positive and for the human being that is behind the screen trying to embrace a new community, a new life, a new society. So from a language learning perspective, a complex situational axis was adopted. What I mean by this is that it was the refugees themselves who established that they wanted the courses to be organized based around a situation. Like I said before, first thing you want to do, your first immediate need when you get to a country is things like getting your paperwork, getting documentation. If you are feeling unwell, going to a doctor, expressing how you feel and the symptoms you may have, etc. But around those situations, we had to structure the language that was to be learned, the vocabulary, the grammatical structures, and all of them within the situation. So there would be some pragmatics thrown there as well, and all that had to be incremental and coherent, so that the learning could take place without noticeable gaps, for example, or overlaps, and so that the sequence flew accordingly. And the way we established the micro contexts were followed a design thinking process. We were all together in a room, and we invited everybody to pick up a few post-its, and then we had a big board. We all had to write down why Spanish was needed and why do you need Spanish for, and so everybody would stand up and put the post-it up on the board. And then there would be a second round where clouds would be made, because of course there would be some repetitions and also some overlaps or connections, relations. So that's how, little by little, from a top-down perspective, we started to build up the course and the needs. And well, it has to be said that MOOCs are eminently visual learning objects, so the materials are multimodal, and we have videos, we have audio, we have text. And because we start with straight A1, like absolute beginners level, then we provide transcriptions of the videos, because obviously it is easier to have text in writing, where you can maybe go to Google Translator or look it up on an online dictionary. And also all the micro videos that we recorded explaining the use of the different tools in the course, like how to watch a video, how to join the course, how to proceed to do an activity evaluation. There are different micro videos, very, very short videos, 2-3 minutes tops. And because we didn't want those videos to be just in Spanish, in the case of people with really zero Spanish, then they are not only transcribed into this language, but also into English, French, and Arabic, because they were found to be the 3 most spoken languages among the refugees, common languages. And we were also concerned with every module teaching the 4 main competences, like writing, reading, speaking, and listening, so that there wouldn't be a lack of balance or any decompensation between the four areas. Well, the language was neutral and adapted to the different contexts of daily life in Spain. And another positive thing is that this was a MOOC not just aimed at refugees. We have 2,000 students, and it'll be very exciting to analyze the results of the final questionnaire to see the percentage of refugees. Although we know for a fact that we have many refugees, for they have said so in the forums. This is a truly inclusive experience, because they're also non-refugees, which is just like society is like. So we find that experience is a reflection of what we of the inclusive environment that we wish for these participants, for refugees. And this is an example of what the course looks like, and we have just taken vocabulary as one linguistic aspect, just to show you how it is organized. On the left hand side you can see there is like a list of vocabulary of the wording of the activities, because somebody might know how to say hello in Spanish, or my name is whatever, but it is very likely that they won't know how to say please repeat this, and go to the video and then answer the activity underneath, etc. This kind of vocabulary is not exactly A1, so we included a chart that has the words in Spanish with the corresponding translations into English, French, and Arabic. Then we have activities, as you can see in the middle screen, activities just to work on vocabulary. And on the right hand side there is a list of vocabulary of all the main words that has been learned in the corresponding module. So we provide the word or sequence or locution in Spanish, and a brief explanation taught in very, very basic Spanish, together with an example of usage, and then the translation in English, French, and Arabic. And this is how orality is taught us at the simplest level. We have on the left-hand side the alphabet, and of course there is audio, and as the suggestion to repeat every sound after it's heard. Then we have the numbers and an activity around the numbers, which are present, of course, in people's age. So to give a real life and an authentic context of application. And this is how the videos are presented. It is interesting to say that it was the refugees themselves that are the protagonists of the videos, and they are the actors and actresses, and we provided our studios, our recording studios at UNED, and we worked on the dialogues together, and they learned them by heart and performed them, and it was a most interesting experience. We also transcribed the video dialogues, and we provide a text that can be downloaded, because remember that many of these people are in camps, refugee camps, where they cannot have internet access all the time. So the idea is that they can download all the work and the files, and then they can work on them offline. And the videos are also translated into the different languages. Remember, we are talking about A1. This is not common in other levels, but it is on this one. And a key tool, of course, of all the MOOCs that are at UNED, and of course these ones, is the forums. The forums are not only a way that a participant may have to ask a query, but also to socialize, to meet other people that want to learn Spanish, because otherwise doing a MOOC can be a very isolated experience. And also it's a way of undertaking some production activities, written production activities. And we always emphasize the fact that it's very important for people to be able to talk about themselves, their experiences, which renders the course much more enriching than if it's focused on Spanish reality only. So if we are talking about the health system, for the sake of matter, in the 4th module of the first course, then they are invited to go to the forum and talk about the health system in their country, and some contrastive analysis can be done and observations, and they are encouraged, of course, to use Spanish, but they are also told that they are welcome to use their own language if they cannot express themselves at all in Spanish yet, or try a mixture of both. So our approach is very interlingual, is very open in that sense. Finally, I'd like to mention that we have a Facebook group, which is proving to be very complementary, and by no means is it a redundancy or a repetition of the forums. It has its own role. People go there when they click. They connect to Facebook to have a social interaction with friends back in the countries or in other places in the world, and they go to the page which is open, and they say, hello, I want to learn Spanish because I want to make friends, or this is proving very difficult. It's a way of having a space that is no so academicist as being in a university platform, and they can approach it from a more personal, relaxed, open and informal, unstructured perspective. So I think in that sense it's complementing very, very well. So this is all I had to say. It's been a fascinating experience, and we are here to stay, so you'll be no doubt hearing more about this work if you are interested. This work is proving that language MOOCs LMOOCs for refugees are possible. The scaffolding that we provide is essential. The fact that our digital support is a mobile phone, and we're working towards recognition and certification, because at the end of the day, these courses need to be officially recognized, and we have already demonstrated that they can correspond to a one university credit, and these courses can be certified, and that is becoming more prominent at university level, and hopefully at cross international level as well. I hope it's providing a taste for true social inclusion that will carry on in their digital lives, not only in their digital learning. Thank you very much. Goodbye.